What if Jon Snow hadn't grown up as the bastard in the shadows, but instead walked Winterfell's halls as Lord Jon Stark, firstborn son of Ned and Catelyn? What if everything you thought you knew about the Stark family was built on a lie of silence? Snow blanketed the courtyard of Winterfell, but this time it wasn't biting cold Jon felt on his skin. It was the heat of eyes watching him. Jon Stark, not Snow, not the quiet outcast eating alone, wearing hand-me-downs, training harder just to be half seen, but Jon, heir of House Stark, the sigil of the direwolf embroidered in gold on his cloak, his place at Ned's right hand, never questioned. And most importantly, his mother's eyes no longer flinched when they met his, and that changed everything. Jon grew up with the weight of legacy instead of shame. His lessons weren't whispered in the shadows of Maester Luwin's chambers. They were spoken boldly before the bannermen of the North. Robb, still his brother, now stood slightly behind him in the line of succession, and though love bound them, that shadow of resentment, it lingered. But it wasn't Robb that changed the most. It was Catelyn. When Ned brought Jon back from the Tower of Joy, newborn and bloodied, he didn't lie. He looked her in the eyes and told her the truth. This is Lyanna's son, my sister's blood, and now our family. Her silence had been long that night, broken only by a whispered, "Then we raise him as Stark." And so she did, but not without cost. Her smiles came rarely, measured like coins. Her eyes followed Jon like they followed wolves, fascinated but wary. And while she never said it aloud, there was always the quiet calculation in her glance. If Jon had not been raised as heir, Robb would have been king. Wait, king, yeah, we're going there. Because this decision didn't just change dinner seating in Winterfell, it rewrote the entire fate of Westeros. Jon didn't take the black, didn't join the Night's Watch, didn't meet Ygritte, didn't rise, didn't die. Instead, he ruled. But before we jump forward, pause with me a second. Think about what that one change meant to the young lords and ladies who grew around him. Theon, already conflicted by his status as hostage, now had to watch Jon wear everything he thought Robb would inherit. Arya, wild and free, adored Jon even more. Bran idolized him. And Sansa, she was taught from birth to respect him, but never outshine him. And yet, it was Ned's favor that bred the first seeds of war. Bannermen noticed. Letters spread. Whispers grew like weeds. Why does Eddard Stark favor a dead woman's son over his true-born heir? Is Jon even fit to rule the North? Will the wolf split its own pack? Meanwhile, Catelyn kept her pain buried under honor, but not even stone could endure forever. The day Jon turned 15 and led his first group of men in training, surpassing even Sir Roderick's expectations, Catelyn watched from a tower window, silent and still. Robb, watching beside her, didn't miss the shift in her eyes. Here's where it gets crazy. The Raven came from King's Landing. Jon Arryn was dead. King Robert rode north not to drag Ned into war, but to see the boy he had heard about. Ned's true heir, they whispered in court, the Northern Prince. And Robert, ever driven by nostalgia and regret, arrived at Winterfell not just for Ned, but for Lyanna's son. Now stay with me, because what happens next changes everything. Robert's eyes lingered on Jon far longer than expected, not because of his resemblance to Ned, but because of Lyanna. "He has her fire," Robert muttered, tankard in hand. "Gods, Ned! He looks like Rhaegar." Silence. For a heartbeat, Ned Stark's breath caught, because Jon didn't look like Rhaegar Targaryen, unless you knew to look for it. That night, Robert drank more than usual, laughed less. And when Cersei noticed the change, she didn't stay quiet. You see where this is going? That one visit lit a fire under every secret in the realm. Cersei sent word to Tywin. Varys began to sniff too close to Winterfell. And Littlefinger? Oh, he saw opportunity in every rumor. Meanwhile, Jon was oblivious to most of it. Until Maester Luwin pulled him aside late one evening. "You must be careful, my lord. Power draws eyes, and not all who smile mean you well." But Jon had grown bold. Not arrogant, not cruel, but used to respect. He believed his father's truth would protect him. Spoiler, it wouldn't. The Lannisters left Winterfell with narrowed eyes and quiet plans, and Robert, heart troubled, invited Jon to court, not Robb. To be a ward, to learn from the king, to live among lions, and Ned. He hesitated, because this wasn't just a political offer. This was a test, a trap, a ticking storm wrapped in gold. But Jon wanted to go. He wanted to see the world. And Robb. Robb didn't want to be left behind again. That tension. It was growing. And it was about to crack the Stark family in half. Because Jon Snow had grown into Jon Stark, a prince in the north. But the south? The south remembered dragons, and Lyanna, and blood. And somewhere in the ashes of a fallen dynasty, a dragon queen was stirring, and she was coming for what was hers. Jon Stark's departure from Winterfell felt like a crack running through the heart of the north. Though banners still flew high, and wolves still howled from the battlements, nothing felt steady anymore. Robb watched his brother ride out with a clenched jaw and a storm in his chest. It should have been him, it was supposed to be him, the heir, the trueborn. But somehow Jon always walked ahead, shoulders taller, voice steadier, eyes calmer, loved by the men, chosen by the king. And now, sent to court while Robb remained in the snow. Catelyn tried to hold things together, but she felt the shift in her family. The boys grew distant. Arya snapped at her more. Bran looked confused. Sansa started asking questions she wasn't ready to answer. And deep down, in the pit of her heart, Catelyn knew. She had allowed this. She had allowed Ned's silence to turn into authority, his loyalty into a second legacy, and the boy she once feared would ruin her family now had the power to command it. Meanwhile, Jon arrived at King's Landing, and everything the north wasn't, gold, silk, heat, rot, hit him like a wave. The Red Keep loomed like a serpent's spine above the city, and within its walls, the game had already begun. Robert Baratheon greeted him with a half-hearted smile and a drunken embrace. "Your father never stops talking about you," he said, though his eyes seemed haunted more than joyful. "You've got your aunt's eyes. Gods rest her soul." But not everyone smiled. Cersei didn't bother hiding her disdain. Another, "Stark? How charming." Her words slid across the room like a dagger wrapped in velvet. And Jaime. He eyed Jon like a swordsman eyes a rival, curious but ready to strike. Jon held his ground. Years of northern training taught him the value of silence, of watching, of waiting. He listened at council meetings. He sparred with Lannister knights. He walked the gardens with Princess Myrcella and nodded respectfully at Joffrey, who hated the attention Jon received from the king. It didn't take long for whispers to begin. "Did you hear the king called him Lyanna's boy? They say he's not Ned's bastard but something else. Rhaegar's. Impossible, or is it? Pause. Take that in, because here's the part no one saw coming. Varys knew. Not everything, but enough. He'd spent years untangling the web around Jon Snow, and now that the boy stood in the capital, it was time to test the threads. He approached Jon with courtesy and riddles, as spiders do. "The realm is full of stories, Lord Stark," he said one evening, voice like silk, soaked in honey. "Some true, some not, but the ones people choose to believe, those are the ones that change history." Jon didn't respond, but he remembered the words. And back in Winterfell, Robb was changing. He trained harder, rode longer, took more command, in council. But there was a tightness to him now, a bitterness. He loved Jon, but love twisted strangely under the weight of comparison. And Catelyn? She saw what was happening, and feared it was too late to stop. Then the Raven came. King Robert was dead, and suddenly every bond in Westeros snapped like an old bowstring. Ned, still Hand of the King, still loyal, was arrested for treason. The charge, conspiring to place Jon Stark, not Joffrey, on the throne. Shock, betrayal, panic. Back in the north, Robb stood frozen as Maester Luwin read the letter. "Your father is accused of treason. Lord Jon Stark is being held at the Red Keep. The boy King Joffrey demands fealty. The Queen demands blood." This is where the story catches fire. Robb calls the banners, but this time, not for revenge, for power. "Jon is my brother," he said to the assembled bannermen, "and my father is no traitor. But if they want war key, we'll give it to them. Except the North doesn't rally for Robb this time. They rally for House Stark, yes, but now the line of succession is blurred. Some cry, 'King in the North!' Others whisper, "Bring back the prince." And in King's Landing, locked in a tower with a sword but no army, Jon Stark begins to understand what it means to be a pawn in a game he never asked to play. Here's where it gets insane. Jon isn't just a political prisoner. He's a threat to a crown built on lies. Cersei wants him dead. Varys wants him alive. Littlefinger? He wants to use him. But before any blade can touch Jon, help comes from the most unexpected hand, Tyrion Lannister. "You're not as stupid as you look," Tyrion mutters as he slips Jon the key to his chains. "And you're too valuable to rot in a cell. Come with me if you want to live." Yeah, Tyrion just pulled a full-on rescue mission. Together they escape into the bowels of the city, through fire, filth, blood, and disappear. And when word reaches Winterfell that Jon has vanished, presumed dead, Robb doesn't mourn, he seizes the moment. "The South murdered my father, and now my brother. We march on King's Landing, and we burn the Lion's Den to the ground." But Jon isn't dead. He's on the run. And across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen watches flames dance across the coals of her campfire. The dragons are growing restless, and a name keeps echoing in the wind. Jon Targaryen. Cloaked in the filth of the Undercity, Jon Stark ran for the first time in his life, not from fear but from a throne. The Red Keep was a bleeding wound behind him, its towers fading into smoke and shadow as he and Tyrion vanished through the forgotten tunnels, once carved by mad kings and smugglers. The streets of King's Landing above bustled with the ignorance of commoners who had no idea the kingdom's most dangerous secret had just slipped from its chains. Tyrion didn't speak for the first mile, just moved fast, glancing over his shoulder every few seconds like a man who knew too much. Finally, when the tunnels opened into the stinking sewers under Flea Bottom, he stopped and leaned against the damp stone wall. "You're going to get me killed," he panted, lighting a torch with trembling fingers. "And I have to say, I'm starting to enjoy it." Jon didn't laugh. He hadn't smiled since Robert died. "What now?" he asked. Tyrion stared at him like he had two heads. "Now? Now we survive. Then we make sure the next crown that rests on your head doesn't come with a sword behind it." Outside the city, ravens flew. News spread like wildfire. Ned Stark had been publicly executed at the Sept of Baelor. Joffrey's decision. Cersei hadn't even tried to stop it. The crowd screamed, the North wept, and chaos officially broke, free of its chains. But in the Riverlands, a boy no longer mourned, he ruled. Robb Stark was crowned king in the North. His bannermen knelt, but their loyalty was split. Some toasted him with full hearts, others raised their cups to a ghost, the lost Jon Stark. "He would have made a stronger king," someone whispered too loudly at Great Jon Umber's table. "He has the look of a Targaryen, they say, fire and ice." Robb heard it, said nothing. But that night, his fists bled from gripping his sword too hard. Now listen closely, because the war was no longer just between wolves and lions. The dragons had entered the game. Across the narrow sea, Daenerys Targaryen stood before the bones of her enemies and felt her blood stir. The dragons weren't just growing, they were awakening, and her advisors spoke of Westeros more often now, of Lannisters, of Starks, of the boy who carried Rhaegar's eyes but wore a wolf's pelt, Jon Stark, she repeated, as if tasting the name for the first time. "They say he's dead." "Then they don't know Westerosi politics," Ser Jorah muttered. Dany's expression hardened. "And if he's not dead, he's a threat." Pause. Hold that thought, because Jon, far from dead, was making his way, north under disguise, moving through village after village with Tyrion posing as a merchant and Jon as his mute squire. Each day the weight grew heavier. He couldn't write home, couldn't reveal himself, couldn't even trust the North would welcome him, especially not Robb, especially now, but fate doesn't care about comfort. Fate has teeth. At a smoky inn in the Vale, Tyrion overheard a rumor that made his wine go bitter in his mouth. They're saying Robb married the Frey girl early, claimed the twins before the war even reached Harrenhal. Smart boy, ruthless. Jon blinked. "He married Walder Frey's daughter." Tyrion nodded, and sent Theon to Pike to win Balon Greyjoy's fleet. "He's not just marching, he's building a kingdom. and suddenly Jon felt something dark crawl up his spine. He wasn't just running, he was being replaced. Here's where the betrayal kicks in. Back in Winterfell, letters arrived for Robb, from bannermen begging him to address the Jon problem. Some feared Jon would resurface and contest the crown. Others wanted to find him first and place him on the Iron Throne instead of Joffrey. Even some southern lords whispered of a more legitimate Targaryen claim in Jon than in Daenerys. Catelyn warned Robb to ignore it. "He's your brother." Robb said nothing, but he ordered ravens sent to every major port. If Jon Stark is seen, he is not to be trusted. He is no longer recognized as heir of Winterfell or king of the North. Bring him to Robb Stark, alive or dead. Meanwhile, Jon and Tyrion reached White Harbor, and everything broke. The guards recognized Jon, not from his cloak or name, but his face. "You're Ned Stark's boy," one guard hissed. "We heard you were dead." "Guess that was wishful thinking," another growled. They didn't attack, not yet, but they surrounded him, swords at the ready, not as enemies, but as followers. "Come with us," one whispered. "We never bent the knee to Robb. We'll raise you higher." But Jon shook his head. "I didn't come to take the crown," he said, and that's when Tyrion realized Jon didn't know who he truly was, and if he didn't learn soon, the game would eat him alive. Across the sea, Dany's ships were being built faster. The dragons were flying farther, and word had reached her ears that the North had two kings, and one might carry Targaryen blood. She smiled. "I want to meet this Jon Stark," she whispered to Drogon, "and if he is who they say, we'll either rule together, or I'll burn him first." This is the turning point. Jon Stark is no longer a boy searching for his place. He is the place, a crown he never asked for, a truth he doesn't yet know, and enemies, family, waiting on both sides of the sea. Snow fell gently over White Harbor as Jon Stark stood beneath a grey sky that didn't seem to recognize him anymore. He'd returned to the North, but not as a son coming home. No trumpets, no warm welcomes, only the bitter taste of suspicion from every glance and the stifled reverence in every whisper. He should have been king, he's the true heir, but Robb wears the crown. Tyrion saw it in every conversation. Jon saw it in the silence between them. Wyman Manderly, Lord of White Harbor, received them with careful hospitality. "Lord Stark," he greeted Jon with a respectful nod. "Word travels faster than ships these days, yours especially." Jon didn't reply. He wasn't sure what to say. He didn't even know what he wanted. A crown? Revenge? No, just the truth. And maybe peace. But peace was a dead thing in Westeros now. The war had changed everything. Robb had taken Harrenhal. Tywin Lannister had pulled back to the Westerlands. Stannis had declared himself king and was marching from Dragonstone. And in the south, Renly built an army of flowers and gold. But it was the north that held the most dangerous weapon of all. A divided Stark legacy. Jon sat with Tyrion that night in the Merman's Keep, the candlelight flickering like uneasy memories. "He thinks you're a threat," Tyrion said bluntly. "Robb, your brother." Jon looked up slowly. "I never wanted the crown." "That doesn't matter," Tyrion replied. "You were raised as the heir, given command, groomed for leadership. You're the North's firstborn son, Jon, and Robb knows it." Jon's jaw clenched. "He's my brother." "Brother or not," Tyrion said, swirling his cup, "he's a king now, and kings don't share power. They eliminate rivals, especially the ones that don't know they're rivals." That night, sleep didn't come easy. The ghosts of Winterfell followed Jon into his dreams. Ned's voice echoed like a heartbeat. "You are a Stark, but the truth will come one day, and when it does, it must not break you." He didn't understand what that meant until the next morning. Varys had arrived in White Harbor, disguised as always, but Tyrion spotted him before the guards did. "You're playing a dangerous game," the dwarf muttered. "I always do," Varys replied, smiling like a man who knew too much. "I came to speak with Jon Stark. Or should I say Jon Targaryen?" Jon froze. "What did you say?" Varys looked directly at him, serious now. "Your father, Eddard Stark, was never the liar people made him out to be, but he was a protector. Your mother was Lyanna Stark. Your father was Rhaegar Targaryen." Tyrion stood. "That's treason." "No," Varys said, voice low. "It's truth. And truth is dangerous in the wrong hands, but necessary in the right ones." Jon staggered back like he'd been punched. "No, my father, Ned, loved you," Varys interrupted. "Enough to bear the shame of a lie. Enough to raise you as his own. Enough to hide you from Robert Baratheon, who would have murdered you in your cradle." Jon's mind raced. The silver in his reflection, the dreams, the fire that never burned him when he touched the torch that night at the wall years ago. The uneasy glances, the way Robert had looked at him. "You have a claim," Varys said quietly. "Not just to Winterfell, to the Iron Throne," but Jon's face darkened. "I don't want it. And that," Tyrion murmured, "is exactly why people will follow you." Half a world away, Daenerys Targaryen stepped ashore in Dorne, welcomed by House Martell in secret. Her dragons circled above like omens, casting shadows over the sand. "Westeros," she whispered. "Finally." She wasted no time. Letters were sent to Northern Lords, River Lords, and even the Iron Islands. Promises made, old grudges stirred. And in one sealed envelope addressed not to a lord or a king, but to a bastard, was a letter written in her own hand. "Jon Stark. Or is it Targaryen? Come to me, let us speak, before this war devours us both." Robb received word of her landing 2 days later, and the moment he read the name Daenerys, he knew the game had shifted beyond his control. "She'll try to unite the Targaryen claim," Rose Bolton said coldly, "and Jon's the key." Robb looked across the war map. "Then we make sure she never finds him." And with those words the order went out. "Find Jon, kill him if necessary. Do not let him reach the Dragon Queen." Meanwhile, Jon had already made his choice. "I have to go south," he told Tyrion. "If what Varys says is true, I have to know. I have to see her." Tyrion blinked. "You're going to meet the mother of dragons. I'm going to meet the woman whose fire may burn this realm down or save it." They set sail in secret, avoiding royal ports and loyalist spies, and every league they crossed, the sky seemed darker. As if Westeros itself was bracing for what came next, because now it wasn't just wolves and lions in the war. Now it was fire and blood, and the boy who was raised a Stark was walking straight into the arms of the last dragon. The sea wind clawed at Jon's cloak as the ship cut through the black waters off the southern coast. He stood at the bow, eyes locked on the coastline ahead, where Dragonstone's jagged cliffs loomed like fangs. The sky above was eerily quiet, but the crew watched it with the unease of men who knew something monstrous might descend at any moment. Tyrion joined Jon with a flask in hand and a grim expression. "You do realize you're walking into the arms of a woman raised to believe. She's the last of her kind," Tyrion muttered. "A woman with dragons, who might believe you're her rival, or her destiny." Jon didn't answer. His mind raced with questions he hadn't dared ask. Was he truly Rhaegar's son? Did that make Daenerys his aunt, his ally, his enemy, or something more dangerous? When they docked at Dragonstone, Jon's boots hit the black sand with a strange sense of fate dragging him forward. The moment they climbed the steps to the keep, the ground seemed to tremble, not from war drums, but wings. Drogon roared overhead, sweeping low enough that Jon instinctively reached for his sword. Tyrion grabbed his arm. "Don't!" Jon froze, staring up at the beast, scales glinting, eyes like molten gold. Drogon hovered for a moment, then soared upward, disappearing into the mist. A test, perhaps. Or a warning. Inside the throne room of Dragonstone, Daenerys Targaryen waited. Her eyes met Jon's the moment he entered, and for a heartbeat, neither of them spoke. She didn't rise from her seat, and Jon didn't bow. "You're not what I expected," she said softly. "Neither are you," Jon replied. The tension crackled between them like a blade being drawn an inch at a time. Tyrion stepped forward to speak, but Daenerys held up a hand. "Is it true?" she asked Jon directly. "You're my nephew." Jon didn't move. "I don't know. Not for certain, but Varys thinks so, and Ned Stark's silence starts to make a lot more sense." Daenerys stood now, descending the steps slowly. "If it's true, you have a stronger claim to the throne than I do." Jon tensed. "I'm not here for the throne." "You say that now," she said, voice barely above a whisper. "But thrones have a way of chasing the people who don't want them." He took a breath. "I came to warn you. Robb Stark thinks I'm dead. But if he finds out I'm here, he'll see me as a threat. He already does. And he'll try to destroy us both." Daenerys stepped closer, close enough to study the Stark in him, the solemn weight, the burden in his posture. But there was something else too, Targaryen in the stillness of his rage, in the smouldering calm behind his eyes. "And what do you want, Jon Stark?" she asked. He met her gaze. "I want to stop the blood before it becomes a flood. I want peace, but I'll fight if I must." Daenerys stared for a long moment, then nodded once. "Then we make a pact, you and I, fire and ice. If we must take this kingdom, we take it together." But as hands were extended in alliance across Westeros, alliances of a darker kind were forming. Robb Stark, seated in Riverrun's war room, received a visitor cloaked in furs and treachery. Rose Bolton. "My lord," Rose said smoothly, "your brother Jon now sails with the Dragon Queen. Your bannermen grow uneasy. There's talk of Targaryen blood." "Of dragons in the north," Robb's jaw tightened. "I won't bend the knee to dragon spawn." "Then you must destroy them both," Rose said, voice colder than the Dreadfort. "And I know how. We offer them a gift, a peace talk. And then we take the head of the dragon and the bastard prince with it." Robb didn't speak, but his silence wasn't refusal. It was calculation. Meanwhile, Sansa Stark, in Winterfell, under Catelyn's watchful eye, received a letter smuggled from the south. Written in a careful, elegant hand. "Sansa, I need you to know I'm alive. I'm not your half-brother. I am your cousin. My mother was Lyanna. My father was Rhaegar. I don't know what to do with that yet, but I promise I haven't forgotten who I am. I'm still Jon, always." She read it twice, then burned it. Because the North didn't need a Targaryen. It needed a Stark. And as Jon trained on the black shores of Dragonstone, unaware of the knives being sharpened behind smiling faces, Daenerys stood in the map room, eyes on Westeros. "Soon," she said, hand on the carved wolf of the North. "We march." "But are you ready?" Missandei asked gently. Daenerys didn't answer. Her thoughts were already with Jon, with the North, with the fire that could either forge a realm or consume it. And far beyond the walls of Dragonstone, in the ruins of Valyria, a riderless creature soared, Viserion, unchained, unclaimed, waiting, because the game had changed. And Westeros hadn't seen fire like this in 1,000 years. Winter came early that year, not in snow but in silence, the kind that settles over a kingdom when too many powerful people are lying at once. On Dragonstone, Jon stood before the ancient carvings in the war room, his eyes fixed on the cold, stone wolf that marked the North. Around him, Daenerys' advisors murmured strategy, drew lines, measured distance and time. But Jon wasn't thinking about troop movements. He was thinking about Robb. They were once inseparable. Brothers in all but blood. He remembered the way they used to train, laugh, fight, forgive. But those days felt like another life. Now Robb had called him a traitor without saying a word. Now the wolves were circling each other in the dark, and only one would leave the den alive. Daenerys stepped beside him. "We need to move soon," she said softly, "before he comes for us." "He won't send a raven," Jon muttered. "He'll send swords." "And if he does?" Her voice was firm. "Do we strike first?" Jon looked at her. She wasn't the girl he'd imagined across the sea. She was steel beneath silk, fire behind calm, and maybe, just maybe, she saw him the same way. "No," he said. "We hold. If he comes, we'll speak first. I want to give him one chance. One." But that chance was already being stolen from them, because in the Riverlands, Robb Stark signed a letter sealed with wax and lies. It was addressed to Daenerys Stormborn of House Targaryen and to Jon Stark, wherever he may be. The words were honeyed, an invitation, a call for peace, a reunion of family. I promised that the North would not rise against the dragons, if only they'd come and talk. Rose Bolton watched from the corner of the tent, saying nothing, but the smile on his lips was poison, because the trap had already been laid, and the Freys, eager to stain another hall with Stark blood, were sharpening their blades beneath the twins once again. "They'll come," Rose said when the ravens flew. "And when they do, you cut the head from the fire." Robb hesitated only once, when he looked down at the map of Westeros and saw Dragonstone marked in red. "I don't want to kill my brother," he whispered. "You won't," Rose replied, smooth as glass. "You'll kill your enemy, that's what kings do." Back on Dragonstone, Tyrion studied the letter twice before speaking. "It smells too sweet," he warned Jon. "Robb isn't stupid. He wouldn't risk calling a dragon Queen to the Riverlands unless he had an edge." Jon exhaled slowly. "He's my brother." "And that's exactly why it's a trap," Tyrion snapped. "You're his threat. And Daenerys? She's a firestorm in a crown. You think the North will kneel to her? To you once the truth comes out?" Jon didn't answer. Daenerys stood across the room, holding the letter. "He's inviting me as a queen. That means he fears me." "That means he's baiting you," Tyrion corrected, but Jon stepped forward. "Then we go, carefully. If it's a trap, we'll see it. If it's real, just maybe this ends without fire." Daenerys looked at him for a long moment, then nodded. "We go." The preparations were swift. No full army, just a small host, enough to show power, not provoke war. Jon, Daenerys, Tyrion, Grey, Worm, and a dozen unsullied boarded ships bound for the Riverlands under cover of fog. And on the third night at sea, something happened. Jon stood alone on the deck, staring at the moonlit water. The dragons circled above, distant but watchful. Drogon regal and proud. Rhaegal wild and restless. But there was another sound now. A cry, shrill, unearthly, a third shape broke the clouds. Viserion. The missing dragon, thought lost in the chaos of Valyria, swept toward the ships like a storm wind given wings. But he wasn't alone. Riding him, cloaked in black and silver, was Bran Stark, the boy who had vanished beyond the wall, the boy who had died and become something else. He landed before Jon, and silence fell like judgment. Jon stepped forward. "Bran?" But the voice that answered was older than Jon remembered, colder, weighted. "I see you, Jon." Tyrion stepped back. "How is this?" "I am the three-eyed raven now," Bran said, "and I came to warn you." Jon's breath caught. "Warn me about what?" Bran looked at Daenerys, then back at Jon. "There's a third war coming, not of lions or wolves, not of thrones or bloodlines, but of ice." "The White Walkers?" Daenerys asked sharply. Bran nodded. "They march south, faster than you know. They've broken Eastwatch. They are real, and they don't care who sits on any throne." Jon looked at Daenerys, his heart sinking. All of it. The war, the throne, the legacy. It meant nothing if death swallowed the realm. But even as this truth landed like stone, another truth stirred behind Bran's eyes. He stepped closer to Jon. "You are not just a Stark or a Targaryen. You are the song of both, and that makes you dangerous." "Dangerous to who?" "To everyone." That night the dragons circled again, uneasily, as if they sensed the storm approaching. Because now the fire had met the frost, and the Game of Thrones. It was no longer the greatest threat. The halls of the twins were dressed in false peace, tapestries newly hung, fires lit in every hearth, tables lined with bread and salt. A feast was promised, a reunion was staged, but behind every smiling Frey face stood a dozen knives, and behind every offer of hospitality was the stench of betrayal. Jon dismounted first. His boots hit the muddy ground outside the keep with the weight of hesitation. Daenerys stepped down beside him, her silver hair veiled, her dragons tethered at a distance. The sky overhead rumbled, not thunder but wings, and the Freys tried not to look up. Tyrion surveyed the courtyard with narrow eyes. "This place reeks of ghosts. Your father bled here, Jon. Do you really believe Robb wants a truce?" Jon didn't answer. He had no belief left, just hope. And that hope was already cracking. Inside the great hall, Robb Stark waited, He stood at the head of the table, dressed in black and grey, the direwolf of House Stark emblazoned across his chest. Beside him, Catelyn, older now, quieter, tired, in the eyes. Rose Bolton hovered in the background like a shadow without a master. Walder Frey, fat and grinning, was already drinking. When Jon entered, silence swallowed the room. He wore no crown, no armor. Just the weight of his name, his blood, and the burning gaze of the woman beside him. Robb stepped forward, and for the first time in years, the two brothers stood face to face. "You're alive," Robb said. "Not as joy, but as judgment." "You called for peace," Jon replied evenly. "I came." Behind Jon, Daenerys studied the room. Too neat, too forced. Her eyes lingered on the Freys, on Bolton, on the doorways. Too many guards, too many eyes. She leaned in. "This is wrong. We shouldn't stay here." But Jon stepped forward. "I didn't come to fight you," he said, to Robb. "I came to stop the fight." Robb's jaw tightened. "You should have stayed dead." Catelyn moved as if to speak, but stopped herself, and that's when Walder Frey clapped his hands. "Let's eat," he said with a grin. The doors slammed shut. At first it was subtle. The servants vanished. The music stopped. The guards moved to block exits. Tyrion's hand moved to his dagger under the table. Then a scream, a blade drawn behind Daenerys. She turned in time, just enough to catch it in the shoulder, not the throat. Blood spilled on her silver cloak. Jon reacted without thought. His sword was drawn in a flash. He cleaved through the nearest attacker, grabbed Daenerys by the waist, and shouted the only name that mattered. "Drogon!" The walls shook. The roof cracked, and above the twins fire fell. Drogon descended like a living apocalypse, flames spewing from his jaws, tearing through the stone as if the gods themselves had cursed the hall. Panic erupted. Guards screamed. Freys burned. Walder died with a cup of wine still in his hand. His last expression not fear but confusion. Jon shielded Daenerys with his body, dragging her through the chaos, while Rhaegal soared in behind Drogon, screaming. Tyrion threw a dagger into a soldier's neck and followed them, blood spattering his face. I told you this was a trap." But Jon wasn't listening. He turned, saw Robb across the smoke, sword in hand, blood on his cheek, their eyes locked, and in that moment the room fell silent again. Not from peace, from choosing. Robb raised his blade. Jon didn't move. He shouted instead, "Stand down!" But Robb charged. Jon blocked. Steel rang out. This was no sparring match, no brotherly bout. This was survival, honor, love, legacy. All turned to ash beneath the weight of betrayal. "Why?" Jon roared as their blades clashed. "You were supposed to die," Robb shouted back. "You were supposed to stay gone. You were supposed to let me be king." Another blow, another scream. Fire roared above them, devouring rafters and men alike. Catelyn was gone, vanished in the chaos. Rose Bolton nowhere to be seen. The twins were becoming a tomb. Jon swung wide, knocked Robb's sword away, stepped back, breathing hard. "This isn't the way." Robb hesitated. For a moment, something returned to his face, grief, guilt, but too late. Drogon crashed through the wall. Jon turned, grabbed Daenerys, who was now on her feet, one hand pressed to her bleeding shoulder, and pulled her up the rubble. "Fly!" he shouted. They mounted Drogon together, the dragon shrieking with fury as he lifted into the air. Rhaegal followed. Tyrion climbed onto a horse and vanished into the burning night. And below them, the twins burned. The fire ate through the grate. Hall the trap turned to ash, and Robb Stark stood alone in the ruins, alive but broken. He dropped his sword, looked up into the firelight, and whispered, "I've lost everything." In the sky, Drogon roared. Daenerys collapsed against Jon's chest. He held her tightly, one hand gripping her bloodied cloak, the other stroking the scales of a beast that had just saved them both. No crown, no peace, no home, only fire, only flight. And below them, the realm burned. The sky above Dragonstone was crimson at dawn. Not from sunrise, but smoke. The scent of scorched timber and blood still clung to Jon's cloak as he stood at the edge of the cliffs, watching the waves crash below. He hadn't slept. Not since the flames. Not since Robb's blade came within inches of his throat. Not since he held Daenerys in his arms while Drogon tore through the twins like a god answering betrayal. Behind him, the doors creaked open. Tyrion stepped out quietly, a bandage over his forehead, dried blood still on his collar. He didn't speak at first, just stood beside Jon, staring into the same black sea. "She'll live," he said finally. Jon closed his eyes. "I know." Barely. Inside, Daenerys rested beneath thick furs, her shoulder wrapped in soaked linen, her breath shallow. The Maesters said she was strong, but not invincible. Even dragons could bleed. Jon had stayed beside her until the candle burned down. Until the pain in his chest became too loud to ignore. He hadn't told her that Robb tried to kill him. He hadn't told her that he could have killed Robb first and didn't. He hadn't told her and that he almost did. Tyrion lit a flask, took a long drink and handed it to Jon. "What now?" Jon didn't answer right away. Because there was no easy answer, no clean ending. "Robb's lost half his forces," Tyrion continued. "The Freys are ash. The Riverlands will break with him. But the North? They're still his. And I'm still a Targaryen," Jon muttered. "Not to them," Tyrion said. "To them you're still a Stark, the one that survived." Silence. Then Jon said it out loud, for the first time. "He's not my brother anymore." Tyrion gave him a long look. "You sure about that?" Jon didn't reply. Inside the keep, Daenerys stirred. Her eyes opened slowly, hazy with pain. Missandei sat beside her, reading softly from a book of old Valyrian verses. When she saw Jon enter, she rose and left the two alone. Jon approached the bed and knelt beside her. "You shouldn't have come with me." "I'm glad I did," she whispered, voice weak but steady. "If I died anywhere, I'd rather—" "Be with you?" Jon took her hand gently. "It was cold. Don't say things like that." She gave a small smile. "Why? We both know where this is going." "Where?" She looked at him with heavy eyes. "To the wall." Jon blinked. "The wall?" Bran's warning echoed in his skull. "The walkers are coming." "They're not myths," Daenerys said. "Bran's. Seen them. And you've felt it too, haven't you?" Jon nodded slowly. "Every time the wind blows from the north." Dany struggled to sit up. He helped her, propping her against the pillows. "We've fought each other long enough," she whispered. "We burned cities, we slit each other's throats, but if death walks again, none of it matters." Jon stared at her, then nodded. They sent the first raven the next morning to the wall, to Castle Black, to every lord still breathing, a message written in both names. "The true war begins now, against the dead, against the dark. Stand with us, or perish." But far to the north, the snow had already begun to fall. Beyond the wall, at the shattered ruins of Eastwatch, something moved. Not a man, not a beast, but a king. The Night King stood in the blizzard, blue eyes glowing like ice-forged stars. His army stretched for miles behind him, an ocean of silence and hunger. And at his side walked creatures even older than myth, once men, now nothing. And above him, a shadow in the storm, Viserion, but not the same. His eyes now burned blue. His wings carried frost. His roar cracked the sky. He was undead. And he remembered his fire. The Night King raised one hand, and the blizzard obeyed. Winter had come, and it brought death. In Winterfell, Robb stood at the Godswood, face hollow. He'd received the raven, read it twice, burned it. Catelyn watched. Him from a distance, her hands shaking. "He's your brother," she said. "No," Robb replied. "He's something else now." "But he's right." Robb didn't look at her. "I know." He turned and walked away. South of Winterfell, banners rose, small houses, broken armies, but they were moving toward Jon, toward Daenerys, toward war. But this time not over a throne, over survival. On Dragonstone's cliffs, Jon stood beside Daenerys as snow fell from a sky that hadn't known winter in years. She leaned against him, weak but alive, and when he turned to her, he spoke without fear. "We march north. To save the realm?" she asked softly. Jon's voice was iron now. "No. To save the living." Behind them, Drogon spread his wings. The storm was coming, and this time they would face it together.